Is it clear now, or does it still do?
Yes, it's clear now.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, good. Good. Thanks for telling me, because I looked at that. It said something weird and I don't know what happened. And I get tech stuck really easily. Really. Okay, so we're okay. One more try here. Okay, so the knotweed. This is the picture of the knotweed, which grows like 8 feet, 10 feet tall. But the bees love it. You'll hear every beekeeper rave about it. The noxious weed board goes crazy. It is the noxious weed that they can get funding to remove, which is bad for us. But the reason they can get funding to remove it is it impacts salmon. It grows right along rivers and salmon streams and replaces the native habitat. And that's a whole story in itself, why that helps the salmon. This crowds out the good stuff. But for us beekeepers, what else blooms at this time of the year? And there's a few people who have really good clover, or I know Ron was posting on the discussion group that he had the little yellow, looks kind of like alfalfa or clover, bird's foot trefoil, I think is what it's called. I would just think of it as yellow clover. There's not a lot of things that bloom natively. So our European Western honeybee goes for the non-natives. They love this. The noxious weed board is just going crazy. There's square miles of it, I'm sure, in Western Washington. I hope you got the newsletter. If not, you need to get on the newsletter distribution list. Let me know. Carly did a great job again. A lot of information in there when you can't find stuff. If you can go back to that, I just put it under files on the discussion page. I think this is old here. Sorry, this is an old slide. The hive sides, we are winding down. In the newsletter, it warns you the next weekend is the last one I can promise. And then I am gone for 6 weekends in a row. 2 for the fair, 2 for a vacation. And then the return of the salmon, we're doing a booth there out in Sultan one day. And then for the WASBA conference, I'm gone to that. Anybody who'd like to help out, I could get 1 volunteer already to help out at the booth over in Othello, first weekend of October. You can camp there, or someone was telling me that Pothole State Park is really nice to camp at. So I was maybe going to try that. And they'll let us as a member club put a table out and tell people we exist. And what's interesting about that is talking to other clubs and getting ideas from them on what they do, how they handle things. Sometimes it's important. Like one like secretary, I think Barb's the secretary of another club. She said, don't put your mail through the Wix website. It caused no end of trouble. So Wix is not so bad, I guess, on the other things, but it's not good for the mail. And AGH traps, I hope everybody got theirs out. It's not too late. If you haven't heard this about wasps and hornets and such, and bumblebees too, actually, a lot of things fly 10 degrees lower temperature than a honeybee does. So you're thinking in the spring, your honeybees aren't really flying yet, and you get raided out by there usually aren't that many wasps early in the spring, but it can happen that they're just going straight into your hives. In the fall is when it gets really important. As the temperature drops, I had a low of 45 degrees last night. I'm just kind of in between Monroe, Woodinville, and Bothell. And Maltby's my closest town, but who knows where Maltby is. So watch, because the temperature drops, which is handy. Has anyone noticed that when you're putting the feeders on, your feeder jars on, if the bees are all down because it's kind of cold, early morning is the easiest time to put your feeder jars or fill your feeders real quickly. They don't cool down too much. I still need a veil and gloves though. Okay, so see the newsletter for everything I forgot to mention. This was like an extra page in the newsletter. The Evergreen State Fair is totally reorganized this year. We have a booth there, and this Friday, expect the email with the map, the information, my cell phone number, and maybe one more to text or call during the fair, depending on who's available to really be there. And if you need the tickets mailed, fine. If you'd rather call the cell phone, oh, I got to get people in. Sorry, people are waiting to come in. Okay. Oops, more people. Okay, good. Everybody that just joined, as you're joining, the meeting is being recorded.
Okay.
So you can catch this up on YouTube. And meetings are public view. Classes, you have to ask me for the link. So this Friday, if you have already volunteered, expect an email with a map explaining. It's actually really easy
Signed up with it.
our booth. I think you need to mute there. Unmute.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Can't mute myself. Okay.
It's already.
I need one more person muted. Let me see. I'm trying to think. I'm going to go ahead and mute some people, okay? You can always unmute yourself later during the discussion. So this Friday, expect that email with as much information as I've got. I picked up the tickets today. If I hadn't gone to get them, the fair's a little discombobulated. I'm not the only person. So I've got the tickets in my hand. Either I can mail them to you, and I have to make sure I've got everybody's address. So when I send out the email, I'll ask you to respond if you want them mailed with your address. I probably have it just to make sure. Or you can come to the fair, free parking, so it's going to be easy, but you still have to call me on the cell phone, and I can come meet you at the red gate, which is the gate on the red parking lot side. And they promised me in person that the red flags and it would still be the red parking lot, even though they're not charging. It is much easier than parking on the other side of the fair and walking across, unless you'd like to take the tour. I had trouble the first couple of years that I volunteered at the fair. But in addition, with all the other things they're doing, there's going to be no judging, no tasting, no prizes. I don't even know if you get a participation ribbon. However, because there will be limited display at the honey booth, Tim 80, who's in charge of the honey booth, was saying he'd like about 60 entries, and it's going to be a little hard to get because there's no money. Sorry, no ribbon, no beautiful ribbon to display. However, you will get a lot of attention. And if you'd like to kind of make sure that your kids, grandkids, neighbors know to stop at the honey booth and see your bottle out on display. This year, you can use anything you want. If you want to use one of these fancy canning jars, fine. You don't have to do, these are the queen line jars. And usually when you submit a honey sample, you're not supposed to adorn it. You are supposed to put it in exactly this type of jar that's called a queen line, preferably glass, exactly this. Okay, so this year, you can go ahead and decorate it up as much as you want with your label, ribbons, frills. If you have the teddy bear honey bottles, you could put little bow ties and hula skirts on the teddy bears, whatever you want to do. You can have some fun this year. That's the consolation. But they would really love some entries. And if there was a big discussion, somebody started a great discussion on the group page about lip balm and stuff, you could actually submit stuff like that and put that put your name and a little note explaining what it is. And the drop-off sites are in the newsletter on the group discussion page. If you can get it to me, I'm going to be taking one, or maybe you can. And Pat's on here, Pat Waymeyer, and we gave her address. I saw her log on, and she's in Marysville, which is a very convenient. The UPS stores are way up in Arlington. They call it the Smoky Point, but it's more like Arlington, the address. And again, that's in the newsletter. Or Snohomish on Avenue D, which turns into Bickford Avenue, inside Snohomish. And then find a way. It's really fun. This is going to be part of the fun part of the fair. Sorry, no money prize and no guarantee you'll get it back. But you can, if you can find one of us at the end of the fair, you could try to get your donation back, or you could accept that it will be donated on, won't be sold. But for example, there's a raffle at the Return of the Salmon, which follows the fair about 3 weeks later. Anything else? No, I don't think there's anything else. So more information coming on the fair. I have the tickets. Parking is free. You're greatly appreciated. The Sign Up Genius is that link is in the newsletter on the group discussion page. Oh, I just really think we ought to do an AGH, cooking demonstration or something. But anyway, actually, seriously, when we go to the fair, there's usually a couple of topics that are oddball. Trust me, even if you're the most beginning of beekeepers, you can answer most questions that you will be asked by the general public. And we will have lots of brochures and magazines to pass out, and take one of everything yourself. We're going to have the Bee Culture magazine, past copies, the American Bee Journal past copies, a whole bunch of full color brochures on honey recipes and the importance of honey from the National Honey Board of the United States, and coloring sheets for the kids, stickers. I found the queen stickers and also honey stickers, which is always a big hit to give those out. And we will have a demonstration hive, so you actually will be able to spot the queen. Incidentally, I may need a queen or two. One queen for the first week of the fair, and they get kind of tired, and then another week would be good to give that one a break. It's a queen that will go in an observation hive, which is just 5 frames, and one you can see through the glass and see the queen. That'll be fun just to show to people. That's sometimes the most important thing, is spot the queen. I'll send out maps. Okay. If you're not familiar with the club particularly, we are recording this meeting. It goes on to YouTube. We do classes at cost. We may have to have a small membership fee this year. I'm not sure, because the Wix is costing us some money, and we just got liability insurance for the hive sites. It didn't cost a lot, but it was the same one that a lot of bee clubs use. Probably a good idea for people who are hosting hives on their property, and like Ron and soon to be Jessica, it'd be good if they're protected, just in case of any problems. Otherwise, at this point, everything's donation beyond the classes at cost. And we do have a extractor. Corinne is on here. Corinne, I've got to get the extractor to you. It's getting used right now. And then Corinne is more up north by Marysville, sort of. Everett, kind of closer to I-5. I am just finding me is difficult for most people. Somebody more on the I-5 corridor is much better. So if Corinne's still willing to do that, the extractor is coming someday.
That's great. I'm more than willing to do it. I'm right off I-5, and
yes,
it'll be an easy place to pick up.
So if you'd like to be the next person to use it, this is a good time to ask on the chat. And I should be able to get it to you, Corinne, this week. It's just the fair has been holding things up. Fair starts Thursday, that fast. Yeah, because I'm out of the way. It doesn't make sense for me to have it. Oh, we got the YouTube. So now we have, if you put in SnoKing Beekeepers, we will come up. I couldn't totally customize the address, but that's our new address. So if you can type in SnoKing Beekeepers, you will go faster to the page. You'll find our channel. Meetings are on there. And there's also a short video of me saying nothing very important about the Asian giant hornet, but we got on TV. SnoKing Beekeepers is famous. Such as it is. Okay. Oh, the shifts. There are 3 shifts. Go to the Sign Up Genius. The demos. Okay. Especially for those of you who are outgoing, uninhibited, like to have fun. How would you like to get up? We have 8 slots on Saturdays and Sundays, 2 each day. I think it's like 12:30 and 4 or something. And we have up to an hour. I'm sure nobody has an hour's worth of material, but if you do, you probably would gather a crowd. Would you like to demonstrate the Waggle Dance, or better yet, get everybody else to do the Waggle Dance? I can see some audience participation. You can get up and just talk about bees if you like to. We're going to have poster board cutout wings. I haven't done that. If anyone's kind of crafty with an X-Acto knife, I have the pattern. And what Simon Reese is holding here, and I can send you the video on Simon Reese demonstrating how bees fly, how they actually get that helicopter flight. And it's something that's very visual and kind of interactive. We're going to have a little bit of a stage, not much of a stage. and a microphone with the ride screaming next to us if it's like 2 years ago. So it's got to be something interactive you're doing. And then, oh, the other thing, let me see. I don't know if I can I make me show up? I don't know. Can I make me show up? I don't know if I can. Ron, who does the hive sites up in Granite Falls, he has made 3, the drone, let's see, which one is this? This is the queen, the drone, and the worker bee models, actual, couldn't get them painted, but actual models that you can see these and see the anatomical differences. And that's a good talk. They're fairly durable. They probably wouldn't last very long in a preschool, but they're actually, I think, good enough that we can pass those around and ask people, which would you like to be? Would you rather be the bee that lives a long time and has a very boring job laying eggs, emitting pheromones? Or would you like to be the one that gets to go out and travel distances and be the strong, big, herky drone, which unfortunately does not survive mating if he does succeed, but he gets a free ride, doesn't have to work, just travels for a job until he either dies or he gets kicked out of the hive in the fall. But you could also be the worker, which is the most exciting because you get to do all these jobs in your lifetime. You start out, you do a little custodial, you do a little nursing and babysitting, you move into construction, engineering details. Before you know it, you're out foraging. You become the lead forager, the scout, maybe even help with the swarm. Okay, you could describe the 3 castes of the bees, for example. I think that could be something some people would like doing. And if you just like to be the demo person who stands there and holds the wings and demonstrates, I'd be happy to talk for you. I can talk. You never noticed. Okay, but I figure this is 8 opportunities, and there are people in this group who are kind of thinking about their points for journeyman. Your points at staffing the booth are a different category, and journeymen often earn half of their service points that way. And then you need some other way to earn the other half. And one of those is presentations. So this is a different category. If people are interested in that, talk to me. You pick any topic you want. I've got some. I think I can even get some bee. You can talk the parts of the bee. What part of the body does the audience think that a bee tastes with, smells with, communicates with? And you could think, if you think about it, it could be kind of interesting. I'll help you write a short script or a 3x5 card or whatever you'd like. I think even 10 or 15 minutes could really be fun. So we still have the Facebook groups. I'm hoping everybody knows how to find these, the YouTube channel, the Wix site. That's this one here, the yellowish one. I do not know. It isn't very good. You can go click on it right now, and it's kind of messed up. I'm still working on it. I still don't know what I'm doing, and I've been doing it for about 2 months now in my spare time. But eventually we'll get to it, and we'll be able to put applications on there and take the information off the group discussion page, which is getting jammed up with like a blog. It's kind of Ron and I, and usually nobody else, but we really are kind of jamming it up with all the announcements. It would be nice to just say, go over to the website, a .org website, and just simply put the information there, plus in the newsletter. Okay. I think that's most of the important announcements. There was a lot in the newsletter. The annual conference, that's a whole month and a half away. The only other announcement I can think of is, because I'm gone so much for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be gone when the next 3rd Wednesday would happen. And someone might tell me if they think I should move it to the 2nd Wednesday, which would be, I think, September 8th, or move it back to the 4th Wednesday, which I think is September 22nd. So we're going to talk about winterization. I'm almost thinking we should move it forward. give me some opinions on that. I could go either way. I'll be leaving for my vacation immediately after the 8th. I could do it the evening of the 8th. Winterization is such a big topic, and it's kind of boring to older people. Although what I'm hoping is everybody who's made it through a winter can talk about what they did or didn't do. We're not going to try to cover all of it tonight. I made up this diagram to get started. The beekeeping year, it is a cycle, and that's it. And it's what follows what. As you keep getting warned, when should I do something? You say, you ask as a beginner, and even when you're more advanced, you're still saying, when should I do this? And it's the sequence, it's the cycle, and you're constantly thinking about the next step. So if you got your nukes, and then you built population and you were feeding to do that, maybe you were splitting to increase the number of hives, increase population that way. Then you were thinking about, how do I get honey? Especially your second year. You can think about how to maximize your honey production. Getting the biggest hive you can, in the best location you can, giving the bees exactly what they need when they need it to maximize. Then harvest. And there's been a lot of success stories in harvesting this year. It's been great watching people on Facebook and just hearing people talk about it. It's okay to brag. And we can screen share. After I go through some slides, you really can. It's possible one person at a time, but we can screen share. But after the harvest, then we hit the dry spell. I know it actually rained several days during the dry spell, but it's still, even when it rained, there still wasn't that much for the bees to go get in most areas. And we have a July, early August dearth. And then we're already talking about the Varroa treatments, because by now, with the bee population building up, there was a lot of brood. When there's a lot of brood, there's a lot of Varroa, and you can't really get to the Varroa in the capped brood, which is where it hides most of its life cycle and where it reproduces. You can't get to it until the brood population drops, which starts happening late now. And now you can finally detect the Varroa on your slide out boards, because not every Varroa can get into a capped brood because there is less capped brood. Even though Varroa will share capped brood, there will be multiple females will go in to lay their eggs into the same brood cell if there's a shortage of brood cells and an excess of Varroa mites. Okay, but after we finish this, and even as we're doing the Varroa treatments, you will notice that you have excess frames, excess boxes, and it's time to take the queen excluder out, because you're going down to whatever you're going to overwinter in. And the standard recommended is 2 deeps or the equivalent, 3 westerns. Some people do 1 deep and a western and find that works well for them. If it's an 8 frame, it might be 3 deeps instead of just 2, because you're getting 20% less. You're missing 4 frames in 2 deeps of 8 frame equipment, as opposed to 2 boxes of 10 frame deep equipment. And then your goal, you'll hear 60-60 again and again, 60 pounds of bees and brood, and 60 pounds of stores, including the woodenware. And that kind of comes out to 2 deeps. Doesn't have to be tightly packed, but basically that fits in 2 deeps. 2 deeps is insurance. If people say they can do it in less, your first year beekeeping, we highly recommend you stick to the safest way to do it. Having excess stores is fine. And then you're into winter, and you think you get to stop, but you don't, because you're constantly monitoring and checking, repairing, planning for next year, setting your goals, ordering new equipment, and constantly checking. And that's actually the sort of thing that we discuss next time. Or we can do it in the discussion now. We can discuss it. Okay, beekeeper's year. However you visualize it, everybody does it. So I did that wheel. But now some people see it in the stacks going up and down. You're starting with your overwintered 2 deeps next year. Those of you that you got a nuke or a package, it took you a while to get up to 2 deeps worth of bees and brood. I mean, you spent most of the spring, summer getting there. And then, of course, it was hard to get the honey supers on and actually draw out some honey. The bees may have done pretty well, but it's hard to get that surplus. This was actually a year you could get some surplus, especially if you're willing to feed back the sugar to get the bees back up to 60 pounds of stores. This is out of the Beekeepers Handbook, which is in its 5th edition now. The brand new one is 5th edition. If you kind of think of the population, if it's easier for you to think of the population of the bees from January through December, this is kind of the same thing that they're doing up here. However, it helps you visualize it or explain it to someone else. And we are approaching the equinox, September 21st. Although the bees can still bring in some pollen, in some places they're really bringing in the nectar and knotweed. I saw it blooming. I was driving along today, and I know it's blooming down in the lowlands. I don't know if it's blooming up yet at the top of my hill. My bees have to go about half a mile and drop down in elevation about 400 feet, and for most of the knotweed. But there's some that's close to me that's up here on my windy ridge that I constantly complain about. But so a lot of things are happening right now in your hive and outside of your hive. So some of the weather things you're seeing, some of the things you're seeing at the entrance of your hive, and some of the things you're seeing inside your hive should kind of be coming together. For experienced people, it is. It's trying to explain it and put it into words. It's hard. I use these diagrams to sort of talk about it. We are now going to have shorter days. The hours of daylight on the winter solstice. There is not a big variation if you're from Georgia, Florida. I talk about this a lot. They're tropical. Our bees have to prepare for a real winter, but it's an odd winter in Western Washington. Virginia is a little bit the same, so I put in their annual population increase, decrease. Again, the same thing you saw with the boxes and with that general curve, but now this one's separated into adult and brood. And why is that significant? The amount of brood that's adult is far higher as we go into the fall, and then actually in the winter, of course, the brood really drops off. But the Varroa mites their population has been going up and up and up. And that's the next slide. I just want you to notice on this one that the adult population of the hive is now bigger, and any mites that are feeding on bees, if they can only find an adult to feed on, or they have to stay longer on an adult before they can get into capped brood, they are exposed. And when they're exposed, this is when mite treatments can be very effective. And I think this is probably an extra slide. It's not that it's not true, but I think it's a slide from one of my classes. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare. It mentions, again, the knotweed flow. You're going to be evaluating how strong your hives are, combining weak colonies, requeening. That's something that I don't know a lot about. If there's people here in the discussion afterwards who want to talk about requeening, sometimes when you're combining 2 weak colonies, you're picking the better queen and killing off the other one, which some people really hate doing, but might be a really good idea. Feed. Try and decide about feed. September mite count is considered the best predictor of overwintering success. Everything else people did, it was important, but when all was done, the people who tested and treated and got that September mite count down, and here's the alcohol wash that is easy to use. It's the one I usually talk about when I talk about Varroa. You can make homemade ones. Inside your hive, I put this in because inside your hive, you're starting to see changes with the brood disappearing. That bee bread ring, this is the honey arch on your frame, and then you've got the bee bread ring, kind of disappeared like maybe a month ago. And now, if there's no nectar to really bring in, not enough, the bees are doing whole frames of pollen instead. But they're not putting the same bee bread ring right around the brood. Here's a big fat bee bread ring. This must be in the spring, and there's a supersedure cell there too. I think it's supersedure. Doesn't look like swarm. I would check. I wouldn't trust that one. But it's your frames are actually looking different. Your first year, that's one of the things you do is you learn. You just learn that it looks different at different times. Brood disappeared almost completely for a lot of people, and they got really worried they didn't have a queen at all during the worst of the July dearth. But if the knotweed's coming in now and the bees have more, they will feel like they can raise out the brood. And you might see your brood reappear. Drone trapping worked really well in the spring. It's not a very good source right now. Some of the hives still are strong on growing out drones. Drone trapping is that idea that you can use a sharp capping knife and you can check for drone mites on your drone brood. And you can also just pull out an entire comb. Green is usually the color of foundation that is larger based hexagons. That's why some is green. And it's a method you can use, but it doesn't work very well this time of year because there's not a lot of drone brood. You can find this at the HBHC, Honeybee Health Coalition, is a big website. It has a lot of useful, actually, it has short videos on different Varroa treatment, how to do different Varroa treatments. So HBHC, Honeybee Health Coalition. And it also has these graphs where they're trying to help people understand why is the Varroa suddenly showing up. Last year, we got bombed. We really got mite bombed at the end of the year. Almost everybody I knew said, that's really odd. I didn't have Varroa. I kept looking and kept doing the alcohol washes. I didn't see anything. And then, wow, got bombed at the end of the year. Could have been a combination of factors. But one of the factors is you start to see the Varroa and they're exposed when they sit on the adult bees. That's when you can zap them with the miticides. This is the table of miticides. I think I've got this most recent version. I cover 9. I made this up, so there's inaccuracies in it. Quite honestly, there are. It's in files. I keep saying you can find things under files. If we ever get the Wix website going, then I can say that you can just go there instead of going to Facebook every time. But this is 9 different Varroa treatments that people can actually find and actually use in this area. And I have now used I haven't used the bottom. I haven't used 2 of the bottom 3. I haven't used Apistan or Checkmite. I don't think I've ever used Apigard 2. That comes in a gel form in a tray. I've used its equivalent here, Apilite Var. When you are deciding on a mite treatment, there's your own philosophy. I have a red line here. I really like the ones above the red line. Those are my preferences. I would rather use those. Those are all accepted, yes, by organic farming methods. Even though there's not truly organic honey, you can organically manage your bees and you can advertise your honey as you are organically managing your bees. You can't make the bees only get nectar or pollen from, letting people in. Getting nectar or pollen from organically grown plants with a radius of like 2 miles is normal. They will go really close. So if you are an organic farm and you are organically managing them, that increases the likelihood that you're going to have the better honey with the lower contamination of pesticides and herbicides and everything else, all that junk that's out there. So oxalic acid is the one that you hear a lot about. People love it or they don't have time for it. There are 3 ways to put it on. When people are talking about it, do make sure you understand that there are 3 ways to put it on. One is the vaporizing wand method, and you are making a white crystal sublimate, turn into a gas. It looks very dark when it turns into a gas. It goes from white to a dark gas. It's actually crystals as it deposits all over the bees and the surfaces inside the hive. There's another one, it's a dribble drench method, and you're making a sugar syrup solution and putting dissolving the oxalic acid powder in it. That one, I really don't like putting acid solutions on my bees, deliberately dribbling them on. And I think that one has completely different effects on the bees than the oxalic acid vaporizing. There's also using that solution and spraying it on package bees, which is actually very recommended by the beginning beekeepers manual that we use for certification by WASBA. I have never actually done that. It just seems, but it is a broodless period, and that is the attraction of it. Any of these methods is going to be more effective during a broodless period. There's going to be more exposure of the mites when they can't hide in the capped brood. Little stinkers. Thymol. There's the next two on this 10 are thymol. And the second one includes eucalyptol, menthol, camphor, all essential oils. If you're feeling more comfortable with essential oils than with acids, you would pick maybe one of these two. The gel on the trays could be messy and you have to have a little bit of space. You may need an emery shim, which I show a picture of later. And whoever's used these, maybe you can say how you liked them, why you changed. Anything that's a wafer or strip is a lot easier for a lot of people. So Apolite Var is going to be easier in that you're going to break these little tablet wafers into pieces and place them on the tops of the frames. The gel on the trays is going to go on top of the frames, but it's going to need a little bit of depth. It needs like a little bit more than bee space. And also these have to be able to get into the trays, which is why an emery shim, which is 3/4 of an inch, maybe barely an inch of space. I will show you a picture of that. The Mite Away quick strips. I don't have any idea why there's a purple line on my screen. I have absolutely no idea why that's there. Somebody can tell me later, okay? I'm always having troubles with things like that in tech. Formic acid. There's a couple of formulations of that. You have to know what you're doing. You have to read the instructions. I did my best on here. You're still going to have to read it. These, again, are easier because you're placing a pad. Oh, my goodness, though, they stink. You do not want a direct snootful of formic acid into your lungs. Highly do not recommend that. Almost everything here is supposed to be disposable gloves. I think everything is disposable gloves and protection for your mouth. I go into that in more depth if you take a class, or if anyone wants me to do an entire talk just on Varroa. I know, well, you can't talk about Varroa forever, can you? But there are two formulations done a lot the same way, but make sure you read the directions. Hopguard is a sloppy, messy one that it's just ooey gooey. You do it once and you probably will swear it off. Now we're to the red line. Everything above the red line is really intended to be done repeatedly. It's a softer, organic, just like most organic approaches. It requires more labor and more times you have to do it. Just like weeding instead of spraying an herbicide. You have to put more labor and more time in. The three below are, you put strips in and they work for a long time, which brings us way over, if you're looking to this column and closer to the center, the dose duration. Those release those chemicals, which are not supposed to be getting into your honey. So you're not supposed to have supers on ever with those, although it will tell you how many weeks you should wait after you take the strips out. I hope nobody was planning on getting into the email. So now, which one do you use? If you want to be organic, you go above the red line. If you don't have the time to do repeated doses, for example, I'm going to be gone for the next 6 weeks and just basically so busy, I'm not really going to have time to do what I would usually do. I would usually do the oxalic acid vaporization repeatedly. And I've done formic a couple of times. But because I'm going to be so busy and I'm going to be gone for some of those weeks and a lot of the weekends, what I'm going to do is I, for the first time, have done Apivar, which I really don't like it. But it treats for 44 to 56 days. I don't have to worry about the temperature. So temperature, the formic acid, if we have another hot spell, if you go over to minimum maximum temperature column, I did my best. As again, like I said, you're going to have to double check. But as far as I know, the ones that you're really going to have to watch out for are formic. Oxalic acid you can do anytime. Thymol, we aren't likely to go above 95 degrees. Apigard would, you change how much you put out if you think it's going to go above 77. That could happen. And then when you get to formic, that's the ones that are known to kill queens if people don't ventilate properly. Any of these could kill a queen and kill some worker bees. But formic acid is a little bit tricky because of the temperature limitation, and people ventilate their hives differently. So when people are ventilating their hives differently, if you read the extended instructions on formic acid, they usually want the front entrance open, sliding board in, and your little top vent, don't close it up. And it is normal to lose some bees. A few of the older ones, they say, die with the formic acid pads strips put in. And the other thing they say, bearding outside the first couple of days. One of the problems is your queen can't go outside. And that's one of the hazards to the queen. It's also why I don't like the liquid drench of oxalic acid. I figure a direct hit on the queen is not going to help a queen. This is all, see, now I'm getting into opinion here. I did my best I could on this table. And people who use different ones, maybe I really would like you to speak up and tell me. I made this a little larger in case we want to look at it in discussion, and the other half a little larger in case we want to look in discussion. There's a cost to all of this. The vaporizers are coming way down. They're down to like $30 on Amazon. And let's see. So I could spend a lot of time talking. There's a protocol, again, under files. I'm always saying that. The tracheomites, I did want to mention that Apigard has all the menthol, camphor, eucalyptol. The menthol especially is supposed to help with another condition called tracheomites. We don't go into a lot of detail on that. Even in Journeyman, we basically tell you it could be a problem. And you would suspect it when you've eliminated Varroa and other things that you think could be wrong with your hive, and if you still have certain symptoms. Winterization. I don't want to go deeply into winterization because I'll talk too long, and I really want everybody else to have a chance. But your winterization goals, you really are trying to get the bees to be able to form a cluster. And I use this for the brood nest, but also it can symbolize how they cluster. They form this ball, but the frames are there, and the frames are helping them too. It's helping them give a structure to hang on, and it helps them if they've got brood in the center, the queen in the center, and you as a beekeeper want to make sure that the hive is big enough. There's enough bees in that cluster. You want them to have a place that they can cluster. They're not so honey bound. There's no room for them to ever get together in a group. And some bees will actually do that if you give them unlimited sugar syrup sometimes. You want this rule that we say, brood to the bottom, stores to the top. You want the bees to be able to eat their way up through the stores. If you have a top bar, I don't know a lot about top bars. I have Langstroth longs that I'll be overwintering for the first time this year. And one thing that I have read, one reason that people have trouble overwintering a top bar or a Langstroth long is that when the cluster, instead of moving up, it has to move towards the honey. And when it moves toward the honey, if the honey's on both sides of where the brood started out at the beginning of the winter, and it gets really cold, if whichever way the cluster moved and ate up all that honey, if it has to move to the other side, it sometimes will refuse to leave brood behind. And if it's too cold, the cluster has to actually break up, kind of. It has to get warm enough outside. And the bees have to somehow be able to warm up, break the cluster, and regroup on the other side. So don't count on that. Help them out by making sure that at the beginning of the winter, the brood is on one side of the top bar. Then you have brood mixed with honey, and then you have honeycomb, and they will sort of naturally move in that direction toward those stores. Winterization, you're going to be thinking about wind and rain anyway, just like you would for you, thinking about it for your hive, and keeping your hive from getting wet inside. Condensation. This is where people say a wet bee is a dead bee. Somebody thought once that I meant that bees couldn't get dry again. Yes, they can, but when they have cold, wet drips on a bee that's sitting in this cluster trying to stay warm with all its fellows, that's different. And that wet drip, when they can't, that cluster cannot easily move. An individual bee could, but they can't leave the queen that they're surrounding. They have to keep her at 70 degrees, 68 to 70 degrees and dry. Or if they're surrounding brood early, like they often will have brood late into November, and they often will brood up again in January when the days start to lengthen after the winter solstice, about December 21st. And you need to make sure that they can get to any feed you do give them. People worry a lot about some of the wrong things in winterizing. It isn't the cold that kills. I've been talking about the condensation and starvation. They can't get to the stores that you put there or that you're feeding them for some reason. And that there just aren't enough bees. It's very weak or very small. Sometimes your colony's doing fine and the yellow jackets wipe out part of it. Or Varroa takes out part of it. Or you're worried that they're going to swarm and you split late. And you end up with two small colonies that really need to be recombined. This is basically the 60-60 rule, about 60 pounds, half bees and brood, half stores as you're going into the winter. Don't want to go through all of this, but you can always come back in the recording and go through it. It is confusing. You ask how much, and some people say, oh, I never have to use that much. I can get away. My bees always manage with less. And someone else will say, no, I have to have the full 210 frame deeps per the recommendation. And then sometimes it's the weather. And we have some of the most variable weather, I think, anywhere in the continental United States. Actually, the bees are moving around and raising brood for more months of the year when the weather is a little warmer. And because we don't have a temperature drop down to freezing and below and it just stays there, in 2019, that winter, the snow went on the ground for 5 weeks. It was very unusual. It snowed. It didn't keep snowing, but it froze. And the temperature stayed down enough where I was that even when the sun came out, and even when it didn't, it was very bright outside. And I had a row of hives, I think 4, and one of them decided that it was springtime. Apparently, they were more light sensitive and they responded to that much light. And it looked like daylight. It really did. It was very beautiful. And I didn't check my hives well enough. And I lost a hive. The strongest hive decided to brood up. I still accuse them of being Californians. And the Californians like it, the big hives, the big families, right? Okay. People will talk about how much honey they harvested, and sometimes it's they harvest a lot and they feed it back. This is a philosophical decision. You often will find that your bees won't have enough winter stores going into winter if we have a mild, long fall and they just do not respond. They don't understand they're supposed to stop raising brood and start doing nothing but store. Also, a lot of people can't leave their expensive honey sitting on, they can't leave their expensive honey sitting on the hive. It doesn't make sense to them. And that's a strategy. That's something that you have to decide what you want to do about. Because it is so cheap to buy sugar, and yes, buy your sugar now. I'll go ahead and hoard a little bit. Commercial beekeepers buy from the same places that we buy from. It used to be cash and carry, then it was Smart Food Service. Now it's US Chef Store. It's the cheapest place you're going to be able to buy 50-pound sacks of sugar. If you have not actually taken overwintered hives out of winter and had a really rainy, bad spring and ended up feeding 50 pounds of sugar to 2 hives that were established. And even sometimes when they're established, it depends on how close you ran it on the winter stores. You may not believe that you need 50-pound sacks of sugar, but you do. And who knows if there's going to be shortages next spring. And I have gone in and they said, well, another beekeeper came in and they just bought whole pallets. And the store did not reserve. They didn't say people couldn't have whole pallets. And I've actually walked in there and found out they were completely out. Even buying now and putting it into buckets might be recommended. I can't tell you what's going to happen with inflation or anything. So one time I would say hoard, go ahead and hoard. You're going to need that sugar. If you can bank honey in your freezer, great. That's the best spring feed. And just because you knew what your hives did last year does not mean that you know how your hives will behave this winter. Your strain or your hive changes every time the queen changes. And as she ages, it's going to change. It'd be interesting really to hear from people what they're seeing right now. This is one that I tried to work on. Right now, I see herbs blooming. False dandelion is just about gone where I am, although I just saw a whole field of it someplace else when I was driving. Japanese knotweed, I saw that. I don't have goldenrod really in my area. Borage, in a lot of things like that are herb, clovers. Fireweed is hard to tell. It just blooms in bunches and all over the place for months. And this, again, is something that I put under files because keep working on it. Take this, and I think I put it on as an Excel spreadsheet so you can download it and you can work for your area, and maybe you're a different bee club even. And take a look. Supplemental feed. The main thing on this slide is that the changeover is at about 55 degrees, but I insulate. I completely enclose my feed. I like jars. And when it's completely enclosed, especially if you have insulation up above, right under your telescoping lid, here's your inner cover. Here's feed on top of the inner cover. The bees are coming up through the hole in the inner cover to feed. And then if you have insulation and above here already, a layer right under your telescoping lid, I find that I can go to 50 degrees easily and the bees can still take the liquid feed. And since our temperatures kind of hover in the 50s during the days, that can make a big difference depending on how our fall goes. Then you usually shift to fall to dry granulated fondant bricks. Pollen patties, they take better if you can get them under the inner cover. And a emery shim, again, helps. And I promised a picture that it is coming up. It makes a big difference when you start to feed, whether you're coming out of dearth and getting into a knotweed flow, you could stop for a while. But if you're weak, if you have more than a week of inclement weather, and that sounds kind of crazy in the middle of August, but I just had a 45 degrees overnight, 68 high during the day, 2 days the bees didn't really fly. It was in the 60s, high 60s, hitting 70, completely overcast all day long. 2 to 1. Most people are going to shift to 2 to 1 as soon as they're sure there's no more nectar flow coming in. And I would start seriously, if you aren't already using a entrance reducer or robbing screen, if you haven't had a problem you're either lucky or your hives are really strong. I don't recommend open feeding. Most people say don't do it if you're a small hobbyist. Large apiaries can often do something like that, and they're willing to take a loss or take the consequences, but we can't. As well, I'm not willing to. When I get down to 2, 4, I think I'm up to 7 or 8 hives right now. I can't keep track. The kind of feeder, that's a good discussion point too, talking to other beekeepers. Here, finally, I'm getting to, here's the emery shim. And it's actually sometimes used to increase honey production by making an opening. See that notch in there that makes an upper entrance opening and a little more space for the bees to come in. And you put this on top of your honey supers or right under, and bees, instead of going through the main entrance and foragers returning and coming all the way up. Someone's having trouble joining. Instead of coming all the way up through all the brood chambers.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's that good.
Okay. Okay, so this emery shim gives you the space. It's only like 3/4 of an inch, an inch. It also gives you the space right under an inner cover to put a pollen patty, maybe even a Ziploc baggie if it isn't too full. Some people use that as a feeder. This one here, this apparatus here, is different views of the same thing. And people were making what looks a lot like a candy. It can be used as a candy board. You can put fondant in here. You can put dried sugar in here. This is a jar lid that you can use feeding liquid feed, or you can take it out and then you have an entrance and the bees can come up and get to fondant candy, as they call it, sugar blocks, or powder, granulated sugar, not powdered. Powdered sugar often has cornstarch in it. You can also fill it in with insulation. This one comes with a groove cut that you put down so that the bees will be able to come use this hole when you have it open, come up and still have an exit. Keep thinking as you put things on and off for winter, for feeding, and for insulating later. Whatever you're calling your insulation, a quilt board, moisture absorbency board, a moisture shim, Vivaldi boards are basically the same concept. Keep an eye on your airflow, on your venting. Don't block something you intended to have. This one over here is basically a shim like this, and a shim, a spacer, a board, they're all pretty much the same thing. Depth varies a little bit. Where the opening is, if there is one, it varies. This one is a shim with burlap stapled on the bottom. That allows it to hold. You can put this above your inner cover and above your feeders and put something in there that absorbs moisture. For example, shredded paper. Some people use diapers, shavings, cedar, wood chips, something that you're going to use to absorb moisture. We'll talk more about that next time if people are interested in winterizing. You can make emery shims. I know Ron makes some. He made me some. This is showing you where you would put it if you were using it for honey. In this case, to increase your honey production. Pollen patties, you can make your own or buy them. I make my own. I use the thickest syrup I can make. I add it to the pollen sub powder you can buy, Bee Pro or Bee Ultra. Bee Ultra, I think, is considered a little bit better. And you add a little bit of vegetable oil, canola or something, and that helps get the pollen patties when you roll them out between these pieces of deli paper. So I like to do that. I admit it's probably easier if you just have 1 or 2 hives to just buy a package of pollen sub patties. They don't have pollen in them, incidentally. Newspaper merging, if in case anybody wants it, I've got the diagram here. It's in the Beekeepers Handbook. Most of my white and black diagrams are from the Beekeepers Handbook. And I already, did I already mention that for the cluster to form, most people say you should downsize the number of boxes because it's easier for the bees to organize their space. You are going to take the queen excluder out. And as the year has gone by, you were adding space as the brood nest was huge as it grew. And then as that population came down, then you were still putting on the honey supers, and then the population came down. You took the honey supers off. So now some of what the bees have done have ended up giving you excess frames and boxes. And with the top bar, you'd move what's called the follower board. A follower board is like a movable wall on a top bar. One side wall moves. You move it. Why do you have so many excess frames and boxes? Well, maybe you over supered. That means you put an extra box on when you weren't sure if the bees needed it to make sure they didn't feel crowded when you're preventing swarming usually. And if you follow my advice on every time you see a frame of capped brood early in the year, you realize that when they emerge, they're going to need more space. You add about 2 frames, or make sure you have about 2 frames of space every time you see capped brood, that capped brood can come out and be on. You may have had a problem with chimneying. The bees didn't use the outside frames. So maybe this is a good time to take them off and replace them with frames that have something on them, maybe even honey on the outsides, because honey is very insulating for your outside frames in your hive boxes. Yeah, you took those empty honey supers off. They backfilled the brood nest before with nectar, but then they finally got it dehydrated down, and 2 frames of nectar actually turns into 1 frame of ripened honey if they didn't actually use it up in the July dearth. So you should have some empty frames from that. The brood nest decreasing, you may have some empty frames from that. The whole population going down. So it is considered by most people, and this is controversial, so if somebody wants to say the opposite in the discussion, but basically giving the bees too much space allows things like mice to move in, makes it easier for yellow jackets to sneak past the guards and wander around in the hive and start raiding. And that cluster will start forming when bee body temperature reaches 57 degrees Fahrenheit. This sounds really weird because we know that our bees fly at like 55, but when their muscles are working and they're flying, they're moving around, they can keep their body temperature up. But as we hit those days, they can't really leave the hive anyway because it's raining or so cold, so overcast. There is a point at which they have to start pulling in together. And actually, they even start doing it on nights like last night for me, hit 45 degrees. And I went out to change the feeders early in the morning. And I remembered that I like to change the feeders early in the morning because the bees have gone down and I'm changing out the jars on top and it disrupts them less. And if they've totally run out, they get a little grouchy sometimes. So it's a really good time to do that. If you do it at night, remember red cellophane on your flashlight. They don't really see the red. It's less intrusive than shining a bright beam flashlight in there. Condensation. There's 4 ways to deal with condensation that I can think of off the bat. One is tilting the hive by raising the back an inch, insulating the top so that warm, moist air doesn't come up, hit a cool roof or ceiling, the inner cover, and you're going to insulate that by putting the insulation above the inner cover in a moisture shim, absorbency, styrofoam pad, whatever, moisture boards. You're going to
Question.
Okay, what? Is that you, Steve? Okay. What's your question, Steve?
Yep. You got a question?
Oh, I thought you had a question.
Yeah, I do. Those condensation plates that I got, I think I showed them to you. Are those would go above the feeder jars? Is that where those plates go?
They would have to, because otherwise they would block.
I got it. So they would go right above the feeder jars, and that keeps the condensation from coming up all the way to the top. So it just keeps the okay. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
You can buy those. I bought about 3 of them.
The correct word, I think, is moisture board.
Moisture boards, correct.
Yeah, Mr. Woods. Okay.
All right.
So in
Thank
your
you.
case, you're going for the absorb, the last one on here. The other thing that people like is to make sure that there's a little bit of a vent at the top. This is highly recommended. It's not the only way to keep bees, but the idea is that if moist air can vent out, then as the bees can have a drier atmosphere in the winter when they're not raising brood than they can when they're raising brood. When raising brood, bees actually have to have a high humidity, 50 to 80% inside the hive, which is not a problem in Western Washington. We have that a lot of days, but they need to keep that moisture so that the brood does not dry out. But when they aren't raising brood and it's getting really cold in the hive, then that's when the condensation could form. So there's all kinds of strategies for that. Wind and weather. If you don't have your hive in the right place, it's a time. This is a great time to get when the hive comes down in size. Good time to move it. Here's a Hive Carrier. If you need to borrow one, you're out near me in Maltby, or someone else might have one. It really is easy. You strap the whole hive together after you've got it downsized pretty much for the winter, and it is a piece of cake to lift hives with this little caddy type thing. If you can't move it or don't want to move it, maybe a windbreak will work. Maybe wrapping it will help. Wrapping is controversial. People have different reasons for wrapping. This is up in Canada. They are really wrapping. This is 4 double deeps with, these are the entrances. Whatever you do, remember, you've got to have entrances. You've got to have ventilation plan, a condensation plan. Overwintering nukes, that one people have been doing to keep extra queens through the winter. And one way to do it when you don't have a lot of bees is to insulate nukes. You can look this up online. This is a document, PNW 682, if you're interested in that kind of thing. And I can help you find other things. And all of this is for those of you who have some experience or just getting into it. You come up with your own philosophy, you have the concept, and then you figure out how to do it. Often by talking to other beekeepers, trying things out. So I kind of rocketed through all that, and then I got a bunch of nonsense there. So I am going to end the show for right now, but I can go back to any slides that people are interested in. Okay, I better stop screen share. That makes more sense. There I am. Okay, great. I'm glad so many people came. Now you can start talking, and I should check the chat room because are people finding each other, saying where they are in different areas? Okay. Oh, I hope Peter got the audio going. 54 pounds is pretty good. Feeding honey back. That's an interesting one. You would think that bees would love to eat their honey back, especially if you feed it in a jar. And this is odd. When this happened and they didn't really like it, I thought that's really weird. So I tried diluting it down a little more and various things. You have to dilute it down if you're going to do that. And don't be surprised if they don't really like it. So don't feed them a lot at one time like I did, because it will sit up there and ferment. Once you've increased the water content and the heat of the hive is heating it. Actually, they didn't really like it. They preferred sugar syrup because it's closer to nectar, which is what they take in. Is that weird or what? Has anybody else successfully fed them honey? I just tried to give them too much at one time. I thought it was equivalent to sugar syrup and better for them. So I diluted it down, put it in the jars, and it fermented while they didn't take it, if they could get anything else.
Now I've got, remember, Eli, this is Steve.
Yeah, Steve.
I've got all of that, probably 100 pounds of honey, but I'm worried about the foul brood, from the deceased hive. So I'm not going to give them to him. I'm going to destroy it. I'm afraid.
Was it your father or father-in-law, grandfather?
Stepfather. Yeah. Some of it's 8 years old. I mean, there's just 100 pounds of it. And I'm going to have to throw it out. I can't, because all of his died from Varroa. And I just can't trust it. Throw it out.
It should be okay. I guess if you don't know where it's come from, I guess that is a bit
Well, I know where it came from. It just, they all died of Varroa. They didn't die of foul brood. Is that a term? Foul brood. He didn't treat them for. This is like back in the beginning when it was still coming out 8 years ago. He just didn't treat them, so they all died. He had about 8 hives.
The Varroa and foul brood aren't related.
Okay, I didn't think it would be. Yeah,
and Varroa don't get into the honey, and the viruses they carry wouldn't. You couldn't get sick from that when you eat the honey. Or
8 years ago.
Bacteria, you can't. Hey, King Tut's tomb, supposedly there's still honey in there. I don't know that. I don't know how to eat that. So it wouldn't. I guess, what would you worry about?
Well, I told you these things are going through, 6 quarts of syrup in a week. They're just, all 3 hives are just sucking this stuff down, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but it's just, I'm just doing sugar water every week. I got to do it again tomorrow night. I got to do that 3rd treatment for the VAR Life. Is that what it's called? VAR Life.
You're doing the Thymol one, the one that smells like
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Third one tonight. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I would like to give him some honey. It'd sure save me from having to mixing up all that sugar water, but I'm just afraid there's something in it.
That last time you go in, I should maybe come back and see your hives and see how you're doing, because you basically had hives you moved out of the shade.
Correct. Yeah.
Through the summer. Correct. So they got a slow start. So if you had to combine the 2 smaller ones, if they never did catch up.
Are they both caught up? No, they're both a lot of brood.
Okay.
Both of them have brood now. So they're but the big hive is crazy. She's just crazy. So anyway, I'm going to do it tomorrow. If you want to get together with me tomorrow, I'll call you offline. I'm going to try to do it tomorrow. Okay. I'm going to go into it again. You can take a look. If you want to do it sometime tomorrow, you let me know, but we'll go offline. I'm taking other people's time up here.
Okay. Okay. Let's do that. I know
call me.
I promised somebody Thursday morning, and I have it in my notes. If the person's here, I'm going to check tomorrow morning. I know I'm supposed to be at somebody's hive.
Friday, or tomorrow afternoon. Late tomorrow, after
late
dark.
Afternoon.
Yeah, well, you let me know. Go ahead. Okay, let me know. I'll call you. Call me back. Bye.
Okay.
And I can bring that honey over if you want me to bring all that 100 pounds of honey. I can bring all that.
You want me to taste test it on me? I don't know.
No, I don't. I'm not going to taste it.
Honey.
I'm not going to taste it.
Could anything go wrong?
I'd rather melt it down and give it to the bees. Hell, it's better than all the sugar they're drinking. Anyway.
You can try it, but you don't know where it's been, so you don't know if it has nosema in it. Now that can hurt the bees. That's the funny part. Is the viruses, the nosema, the bacteria should have died by now.
I would think so. 8 years.
Even viruses, I would think would have. Even nosema, I would think. None of which hurt people.
Well, if anybody on the call wants
to try
pounds
it,
of 8-year-old honey,
raise your hand.
Let me know, and I'll bring it over to you. But I'll try it. I mean, I'll just maybe use it in one hive and see what happens, and on the weaker hive, and then see what happens. Anyway,
I don't know.
Let you go.
Try it on people. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. What do you do in a case like that?
I don't know. I've had facials done before where they pour it on your face. And so try pouring it on your skin and get moisturized.
Yeah, Steve, definitely. That would, you have the softest skin. You might actually, if you were to put that out, maybe on the group discussion page and say, is anybody interested in this? Yeah, like Pat. Did you see what Pat's comment is in the chat? Make mead. Actually, do you know it? I bet there's a microbrewer. Seriously, you have to put that on the discussion page. And say,
I didn't think of that.
And they'd probably give you a cut, Mead. You get a bottle of mead out of it. Better than that would be the safest thing to do, wouldn't it?
Actually, and for all
in it, but even alcohol. Yeah.
For all of you on the call, I got an email from Sky Mead out of Woodinville. They're looking for volunteers, I think, this weekend to put the new wine up. They were looking for some volunteers to teach, and they needed a bunch of honey. Sky Mead Skymead in Woodinville. Everybody know what that is? They sent me an email saying they wanted honeybee people to come and help them bottle that, and they give you wine. I don't know. It's great wine. I don't know if you've been there, but they wanted some honey. Anyway.
Okay. Okay.
Skymead Winery is what it's called.
Yeah, microbrewers. That's what you should do with the honey you're not sure of.
Do you know who was asking for some as well? And I don't have any because you tell me not to use it. Is Locust Cider wanted to do a honey cider, and they were looking for some honey. So if anybody's got any, I said I can't touch stuff I got because
why not?
Eli won't let me touch the stuff I have, and I need an extractor. I need an extractor anyway. I need an extractor. But anyway,
no human has ever gotten Nosema or any of the bee viruses or American foul brood, European foul brood. You're safe. You can't get them.
All right, I'll let you off here.
Okay, seriously. Varroa treatments. Is everybody? Any volunteers? Nobody wants to talk about Varroa.
Well, I can say that I certainly agree with your slide that talked about September numbers being very predictive. Last year, I pulled honey off maybe the second week of August, and I immediately started, doing an alcohol wash to see what the numbers were after that, and they were really pretty high. Like you were saying, last year was, I think one of mine had 17 mites in one alcohol wash, and I had been on them all year. It was like really stunning. So I started treating really intensively with oxalic acid at the time, and had to continue through November and December and January. Like once a month, I was doing oxalic acid vaporizations when we had weather permitting, and the numbers did come down, and they did really both my hives overwintered and were doing great in the spring, but it took a lot of careful attention right in that September-October window to bring them back down to a decent level. And I would say my thought was going into winter was I was going to lose both hives, because even with that amount of treatment, I just thought, gosh, it's still a little higher than I would like, going into the winter. But then they ended up doing fine. So I pulled off my honey a couple weeks ago, and normally I would have started treating, but I was reading the label very, very carefully. I really wanted to try something different this summer. So I have the Formic Pro, but the label says, obviously there's the temperature swings that we've had lately, which makes it a little complicated. But the other thing was, it said, make sure that your bees are well nourished, that they have stores, and that they're not, really hungry. And I thought, well, shoot, they are hungry because it's so hot, and the blackberry didn't last as long this year, and they're already kind of crabby. So the last couple of weeks I've just been feeding. And my plan is next week to retest, see what the mite levels are in the alcohol wash, and they'll probably have gone up a little bit, and then start treating with the Formic Pro.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think that must be why they say don't treat while you're feeding, which is really funny because we feed so much of the year in the spring and in the fall. And I've always wondered about that phrase, but I guess they're thinking about the well-nourished. But if you've been feeding them, they are well-nourished.
They're doing better. I checked them today, and they'd only had drunk down half the sugar, whereas before, every time I checked, it was just empty. So they're in a little bit better shape.
Yeah. Maybe your knotweed. Yeah, Lake Forest Park. Yeah, I
we
wouldn't be surprised.
We don't have a ton of knotweed here.
You'd be surprised though. It's often someplace you didn't see it. Somebody's property down the ravines. We have all these ravines and little creeks and such. See if you get the dark. Have you gotten the dark honey before in the fall?
No.
No? Okay, then no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good plan. It really does. And I noticed that Pat's on here. Hi, Pat, because Pat volunteered to be a drop-off point if you could put a honey sample. Like I said, you can decorate the bottle and you can use any kind of bottle you want up to, it's in the newsletter, up to a weight of a pound of honey, which is 12 ounces in volume, so it's not very large. But you could do anything you want, any cute little jelly jar or something that you would like to decorate. I think it'd be a great kid project, great fun project to be able to do anything you wanted instead of worrying about it has to be in the classic queen line jar, preferably glass. They actually shoot a light beam through sometimes as part of the judging. So it's part of why they want it to be a certain distance so they can check the clarity, and grade the honey. But this would be kind of fun. I want to do the teddy bear ones and dress them. I wish I had teddy bear bottles right now because I would do that. Little bow ties and glue a little bow tie on or whatever. I don't know. This is a year for fun. The fair is.
Yeah, Eli, I have a box on my porch if anybody wants to donate, but I also have one AGH trap kit left.
Oh, does anybody want that? Yeah, I've got rice wine left. So Pat's up in Marysville, real easy pickup for somebody in the north end. And we really did get about 35 traps out, even though we started with just the materials for 30. Then the gal from the WSDA, Cassie Chihorse, she came back out and brought more out because she shorted us the first time. And by the time she did that, we ended up with extra rice wine. I think we're the most active club. We probably hold the record for getting, because they said they only got a few hundred the entire state set out. So we were some of the best at actually getting the traps out to people. And do register them. It's never too late to let them know where people looked and where people checked. A 0 is an important data value. Every place that there was a sentinel trap, that is actually really, really important. Okay.